Leela had always been curious about the old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been closed for years, and the rumors surrounding its closure were dark and mysterious. Leela's curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to explore the hospital on her own. As she entered the hospital, she felt a sense of unease. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floors creaked under her feet. She made her way down the hallways, peering into empty rooms, searching for clues about the hospital's past. As she entered one of the rooms, she felt a cold breeze blow past her. She shivered and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep warm. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "Get out." Leela turned around, but there was no one there. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she ignored it and continued exploring the hospital. As she made her way deeper into the hospital, she began to feel like she was being watched. She heard strange noises and saw things moving out of the corner of her eye. She started to feel like someone or something was following her. Finally, Leela found herself in the hospital's basement. The air was thick and musty, and she felt like she was suffocating. Suddenly, she heard a voice whisper in her ear, "You shouldn't be here." Leela spun around, but there was no one there. She was starting to get scared, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to stay and find out what was really going on in the abandoned hospital. As she turned to leave the basement, she heard a noise behind her. She turned around and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in scrubs, his face obscured by a surgical mask. Leela tried to run, but the man caught her and dragged her into a nearby room. He locked the door behind them, and Leela realized too late that she had made a mistake by coming to the hospital alone. But then, the plot twist, the man was not a crazed killer, but a security guard who had been stationed at the hospital to keep people out. He had been trying to scare Leela away because he knew how dangerous the hospital was. He had saved her from a fate worse than death, but Leela had been too blinded by her curiosity to realize it. Sophie had always been fascinated with the paranormal. She had grown up reading horror stories and watching scary movies, and it was no surprise that she had developed an interest in ghost hunting. One day, Sophie and her friends decided to explore an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion had been abandoned for years, and rumors had it that it was haunted by the ghosts of its former inhabitants. Sophie and her friends arrived at the mansion and began exploring its dusty halls. They were armed with flashlights, cameras, and an EMF meter, ready to capture any evidence of paranormal activity. As they entered one of the bedrooms, Sophie felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She raised her camera and snapped a picture, hoping to capture something on film. When they reviewed the photos later that night, they were shocked to see the image of a woman in the corner of the bedroom. She was dressed in a white gown, and her hair was long and flowing. Excited by their discovery, Sophie and her friends returned to the mansion the next day. As they explored further, they began to experience strange occurrences. Doors would slam shut on their own, and they would hear footsteps when no one was there. Sophie was thrilled. She felt like they were getting closer to the truth, and that the ghosts of the mansion were communicating with them. However, things took a dark turn when one of her friends disappeared. The police were called, and they searched the mansion thoroughly. They found no trace of Sophie's friend, and Sophie was devastated. She felt responsible for her friend's disappearance and vowed to get to the bottom of the paranormal activity in the mansion. Sophie and her remaining friends returned to the mansion once more. They explored every room, looking for any clue that could help them solve the mystery. As they entered the bedroom where they had captured the photo of the ghostly woman, Sophie felt a sudden urge to look behind the bed. To her horror, she found a secret passage that led to a hidden room. Inside a room, they found the remains of Sophie's missing friend. The twist: the ghostly woman in the photo was not a ghost at all. She was the murderer of Sophie's friend, dressed in a white gown to blend in with the ghosts that were rumored to haunt the mansion. The strange occurrences that Sophie and her friends had experienced had been part of the murderer's plan to scare them away and cover up the crime. Sophie had been chasing a ghost when the real danger had been hiding in plain sight. Emily had just moved into a new house with her family. The house was old and creaky, but it had a charm that Emily found appealing. However, as the days went by, Emily began to notice strange things happening. Doors would open and close on their own, and she would hear footsteps when no one was there. Emily tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but they only got worse. One night, she woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a tall, shadowy figure, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Terrified, Emily told her parents about the figure, but they dismissed it as a nightmare. They assured her that there was nothing to be afraid of and that the house was perfectly safe. However, Emily was not convinced. She began to research the history of the house and discovered that it had been built on an ancient burial ground. She became convinced that the figure she had seen was a vengeful spirit, angry that her family had disturbed its resting place. Determined to rid the house of the spirit, Emily contacted a psychic. The psychic arrived and conducted a séance, but nothing seemed to happen. Emily was disappointed but resigned herself to living with the spirit. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences continued. Emily began to feel like she was going crazy, and her parents started to worry about her. They took her to a psychiatrist, who prescribed medication for her anxiety. However, as Emily began to take the medication, the strange occurrences stopped. Emily felt relieved and thought that the medication had cured her of her anxiety. One day, she was cleaning out her closet when she found a small vial of liquid. Curious, she opened it and smelled it. The smell was familiar. It was the same smell as the medication she had been taking. Realization dawned on Emily. The medication had not cured her anxiety. It had been causing the hallucinations all along. The figure she had seen had been a side effect of the medication, and the entire experience had been a delusion. The twist: Emily had actually been suffering from a severe mental illness, and the medication had been prescribed to help her. The figure she had seen had been a hallucination, and the ancient burial ground had been a figment of her imagination. The medication had cured her of her delusions, and the strange occurrences had never actually happened. Samantha had always been a thrill seeker, so when her friends suggested they go on a camping trip in the deep woods, she was all in. They packed their bags and set off into the forest, eager to explore the wilderness and test their survival skills. As they made their way deeper into the woods, they began to notice strange things happening. They heard strange noises at night and saw mysterious figures lurking in the shadows. Samantha tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. One night, Samantha woke up to find that her friends were gone. She searched the campsite but found no trace of them. She called out their names but received no response. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Panicked, Samantha started to run through the woods, hoping to find her friends. As she ran, she noticed that the trees in the forest floor began to change. The trees grew darker, the leaves turned brown, and the air grew colder. Samantha realized that she was no longer in the same forest she had entered. Suddenly, she came to a clearing and saw a group of people gathered around a fire. They were all dressed in strange clothing and had a wild look in their eyes. They welcomed Samantha to their group and invited her to join them in their celebration. As the night wore on, Samantha realized that these people were not what they seemed. They were not just camping in the woods, they were part of a strange cult that worshipped a dark deity. Samantha realized that her friends had been lured into the cult and had willingly joined them. Terrified, Samantha tried to run away, but the cult members caught her and brought her before their leader. The leader revealed that Samantha had been chosen as a sacrifice to their dark god, and that her friends had willingly offered her up. Samantha was about to be killed when a group of rangers burst into the clearing and rescued her. She was grateful to be alive, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her friends had betrayed her. The twist? Samantha had actually been the one who had convinced her friends to join the cult. She had been lured in by the thrill of danger and had been the one who had offered up her friends as sacrifices. The entire experience had been a twisted game of manipulation, and Samantha had been the mastermind behind it all. Mark had always been fascinated by abandoned places, so when he heard about an old asylum that had been closed for years, he couldn't resist exploring it. He arrived at the asylum early one morning, camera in hand, and began to explore. The asylum was in a state of disrepair, with broken windows and crumbling walls. Mark took photos of everything, trying to capture the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned building. As he made his way deeper into the asylum, he heard strange noises and felt like he was being watched. Finally, he came to a large room with a strange machine in the center. It looked like some kind of experimental equipment, and Mark couldn't resist taking a closer look. As he examined the machine, he suddenly felt a jolt of electricity and was thrown across the room. When he woke up, he was in a different room, strapped to a bed. The room was cold and sterile, and Mark had no idea how he had got him there. He tried to break free, but the straps held him tight. Suddenly, a group of doctors appeared. They were wearing white lab coats and had a strange, clinical look in their eyes. Mark begged them to let him go, but they ignored him and began to perform strange experiments on him. Days turned into weeks, and Mark lost all sense of time. The doctors continued to experiment on him, subjecting him to unimaginable pain and suffering. Mark was convinced that he would never leave the asylum alive. Finally, one day, the doctors released him from the straps and told him that the experiment was over. Mark was overjoyed and ran out of the asylum as fast as he could. He never looked back. Years passed, and Mark tried to put the experience behind him. However, he was plagued by strange nightmares and felt like he was being watched wherever he went. Eventually, he decided to investigate the asylum further and discovered a shocking truth. The twist? The asylum had never been abandoned, and the doctors who had experimented on Mark were still alive and active. They'd deliberately lured him in and used him as a test subject for their twisted experiments. The entire abandoned asylum was a facade designed to attract unsuspecting victims like Mark. Mary had always been a curious child, so when her family moved into a new house that was said to be haunted, she couldn't resist exploring. She spent us wandering the halls, trying to uncover the secrets of the house's past. One day, while exploring the attic, Mary found an old journal. It belonged to a young girl named Emily, who had lived in the house over 100 years ago. Emily had written about strange occurrences in the house and had even claimed to have seen ghosts. Mary became obsessed with Emily's story and spent all her time reading the journal and trying to communicate with the spirits. She even set up a makeshift Ouija board in the attic and attempted to summon the ghosts that Emily had spoken of. At first, nothing happened, but as Mary became more and more desperate to contact the spirits, strange things started to occur. doors would slam shut by themselves, objects would move on their own, and Mary would hear strange whispers in her ear. Finally, one night, Mary saw a ghostly figure appear in her room. It was the ghost of Emily, and she was angry. She told Mary to leave the house and never come back, warning her that the spirits would not be kind to those who disturbed their rest. Terrified, Mary left the house and never returned. She couldn't stop thinking about Emily's warning and the angry spirits she had encountered. Eventually, she decided to do some research on Emily and the history of the house. To her shock, she discovered that Emily had actually been a notorious prankster in her day, and had made up the entire ghost story to scare her family and friends. Mary realized that she had been played, and that there were no ghosts in the house after all. The twist? Mary was so convinced by the hoax that she had unknowingly caused all the strange occurrences in the house herself, through her own fear and desperation to contact the spirits. The real ghost in this story was Mary herself. There was a small village on the edge of a deep, dark forest. The villagers had always been warned to stay away from the forest, as it was believed to be cursed. However, one day a young girl named Lily wandered into the forest, and she never returned. The villagers searched for her, but they could not find her. Eventually, they gave up and assumed that she was lost forever in the cursed forest. Years passed, and the villagers had forgotten about Lily until one day, a young woman appeared in the village. She claimed to be Lily, all grown up and alive. The villagers were shocked and overjoyed to see her, and they welcomed her back with open arms. However, something was off about Lily. She was quiet and distant, and she never spoke of her time in the forest. The villagers assumed that she had been traumatized by her experience and tried their best to make her feel at home. One night, a group of villagers decided to visit Lily to check on her. When they arrived at her house, they found her sitting at a table, staring blankly ahead. They called out to her, but she did not respond. They approached her and saw that her eyes were completely black. Suddenly, she spoke in a strange, otherworldly voice. "I am not Lily," she said. "I am the spirit that possessed her when she entered the cursed forest. I have been living in her body all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal myself." The villagers were horrified and tried to flee, but the possessed Lily was too strong. She attacked them one by one, using powers that no human should possess. In the end, the entire village was destroyed, and the cursed forest claimed its latest victims. The twist? The real Lily had died in the forest, and the spirit had taken over her body. The possessed Lily had been the one to return to the village, and the villagers had unknowingly welcomed their own doom into their midst. There was a small town in the middle of nowhere that was plagued by a series of mysterious disappearances. No one knew what was causing them, and everyone was too scared to leave their homes after dark. One night, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the disappearances. They went to the last known location of one of the missing people, an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. As they entered the factory, they heard strange noises coming from one of the rooms. As they approached the room, they saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner. They called out, but the figure didn't respond. One of the teenagers, named Sarah, stepped forward to investigate. As she got closer, the figure lunged at her, and she screamed. The other teenagers tried to help, but the figure was too strong. They ran out of the factory and called the police, who searched the area but found no evidence of the shadowy figure or any of the missing people. Weeks passed, and the town was still on edge. No one knew what had happened to the missing people or who was responsible. One day, Sarah's mother received a package in the mail. It was from Sarah, and it contained a video recording of the night of the factory incident. As her mother watched the video, she saw that Sarah had staged the entire thing. She had hired an actor to play the shadowy figure and had faked her own disappearance to get attention. Her mother was shocked and devastated that her own daughter had caused so much panic and fear in the town. When the police found out what had happened, they arrested Sarah for making false claims and wasting their time. The town was left to pick up the pieces and move on from the hoax that had shaken them to their core. The lesson learned was that sometimes, the real danger is closer to home than we think, and the actions we take can have far-reaching consequences that we may not even realize. There was a young couple, Jack and Emily, who had just moved into a new house in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. They were excited to start their new life together and had big plans for their future. One night, as they were unpacking boxes in their living room, they heard a loud banging sound coming from the basement. They shrugged it off, assuming it was just the old pipes settling in the house. As the weeks passed, strange things began to happen. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close by themselves, and the couple would hear strange noises in the middle of the night. They were convinced their house was haunted. One day, Jack decided to investigate the strange noises in the basement. As he descended the stairs, he noticed that the basement was much bigger than he had thought. He saw a door at the far end of the basement that he had never noticed before. Curiosity got the best of him, and he opened the door. Inside, he found a room that looked like a child's bedroom, complete with a small bed, toys, and books. Jack was confused because they didn't have any children, and the previous owners had never mentioned anything about a hidden room. As he inspected the room, he found a journal lying on the bed. He opened it and started to read. The entries were from a young girl named Lily, who had lived in the house years ago. She wrote about her parents' fights and how she felt scared and alone. The entries became more and more disturbing, and Jack felt sick to his stomach. Suddenly, he heard Emily screaming from upstairs. He ran to her and found her holding a picture of Lily. Emily told Jack that she had seen the same girl in their house, watching them from a distance. As they were trying to make sense of everything, the doorbell rang. It was a woman who introduced herself as Lily's mother. She explained that her daughter had passed away in the house years ago and that she had kept Lily's room untouched as a tribute to her. The couple was shocked to learn the truth about their house and the mysterious girl they had seen. However, the real shock came when they realized that Lily's spirit had attached itself to Emily, who had unknowingly opened the door to her room. Emily was possessed by Lily's spirit and was now trapped in the house forever. Jack was left alone, haunted by the memories of his lost love and the ghostly presence that he could feel lurking in the shadows. There was a young woman named Sarah who lived alone in a small apartment. One night, she heard strange noises coming from the closet in her bedroom. She was too scared to investigate, so she just tried to ignore it and went to bed. The next morning, she found her closet door wide open and her clothes were all over the floor. She thought someone must have broken in, so she called the police. When they arrived, they searched the apartment but didn't find any signs of forced entry or any other clues. Sarah was shaken but eventually brushed it off as her imagination. However, the strange noises continued every night, and the closet door would always be open in the morning. She tried to find logical explanations but couldn't. She began to lose sleep and became paranoid. One night, she decided to confront whatever was in the closet. She slowly opened the door and saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. She screamed and ran out of the apartment. The police returned and searched the closet, but all they found was a stray cat that had somehow gotten in. Sarah was relieved and decided to keep the cat. However, as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The cat would disappear for hours and come back covered in dirt and blood. Sarah noticed scratches on her walls and furniture that looked like they were made by a human hand. One night, Sarah heard the same strange noises again, but this time, they were louder and more intense. She got up to check the closet and found the cat had somehow transformed into a demon. The demon attacked her, but she managed to escape and run out of the apartment. As she stood outside, she saw that her apartment building was actually a mental institution, and she was a patient there. She had been hallucinating everything and had never even owned a cat. The demon was just a figment of her imagination. Shocked and scared, Sarah realized that she had been living in her own delusion for years and that everything she had ever known was a lie.